My kids know that I have two mottos in life. Number one, a man is not a plan, never has been, never should be. He can be your boyfriend, fiance, bestie, husband, lover, whatever you want him to be, but he is not your financial plan. Number two, every woman is one bad man away from destroying her life. If you're new here, I'm Jenny Cade, and this is Life Take Two, where I share my harrowing escape from Mormon tradwife life and how I've rebuilt on the other side. And I wish with all of my heart that I had grown up with these mottos, because they certainly would have saved me a lot of grief. Today, I'm going to talk about a really sensitive topic. So trigger warning if you are a younger person who maybe doesn't believe on adult TikTok, skedaddle, go somewhere else, because we're going to talk about STDs and some adult things that are certainly not appropriate for children. If you are listening in the car and you have kids in the back of the car, save this one for later. One of the biggest questions that I get when I talk about the fact that my Mormon returned missionary husband committed adultery for most of our 24-year marriage is, how is your health protected? What about STDs and other negative health implications of adultery? So I found out 22 years into my marriage that my husband had been unfaithful to me for most of the time. This was information that was completely new to me. When we got married, we sat down with our Mormon bishop and we just talked about all kinds of different, tips for a happy marriage. And we had our interview to get our temple recommend. And our bishop told us something in that little meeting when I was a 20-year-old girl that would have extremely negative impacts for the rest of my life. Here's what he said. He turned to us and he said, Sister Fisher, Brother Green, if you have had any sexual sins in the past that have been taken care of through proper priesthood authority, meaning we had repented of them, then there is absolutely no reason to talk about those now. Don't talk about your past intimate relationships with other people if you've had any, because they will take away from your marriage. And he turned to me and he said, just imagine, if you've been intimate with one of your old boyfriends and Jake knows about it, then every time you guys sleep together, he's going to be picturing that other guy that was already with his wife, and vice versa for Jake. If he tells you about intimate partnerships, you're going to be thinking about those. So for me, I had a pretty innocent, pretty sheltered life. There were a couple of little things in my past that I had some regret for that I didn't want my husband to necessarily know about. So I felt this big sense of relief. Okay, the bishop's saying that I don't need to tell him about these two boyfriends. One of them was heavy petting and one of them was statutory. Great. Good. Then I don't have to talk about that. Jake's never going to know about that. I didn't realize until just a couple of years ago, as an almost 50-year-old woman, how that moment in time would keep me from ever knowing about who my husband really was, this man that I was getting ready to marry. Because if we had dug into his past, he had had a history that went back to age 7 of some victimization leading to lifelong predatory behavior, a complete lack of real natural relationships with people, and some habits that would have been major red flags that this was a person that I didn't want to get involved in. But I never knew any of that until 22 years into our marriage. Literally, one night after being married for 22 years, I found myself having to ask my husband, were you a virgin when we got married? I was under the assumption that he was a virgin because he had served a Mormon mission. And I had had a friend in high school who went on a Mormon mission and then got sent home and really amidst a lot of shame. And it turned out that he had been intimate with his girlfriend and they had found out about it at the MTC. So they sent him back home and he couldn't serve his mission. So while I hadn't served a mission myself and didn't know all the ins and outs of missionary worthiness, I knew that Brendan had been sent home from his mission for immorality, for losing his chastity. And I assumed that because my fiance had served a Mormon mission, that must just mean by default that he had never been sexually active, that I was marrying a virgin. I was under that assumption for my entire marriage until 22 years in. So when I asked him, were you a virgin when we got married? he began to spill the tea on a life of behavior that I had never, ever, ever known about. And I want to pause right here for a minute, just as a solid warning to young women. Please have those conversations about the intimate partners that are in your partner's past. While certainly I don't buy into the fact that body count is everything, the way in which they engaged in other people prior to you says a lot about the type of person that a guy is. So please ask those questions. You should know body count, and you should certainly know under what circumstances that intimacy happened. I did not know. So 22 years into our marriage, I find out that my husband hadn't been a virgin when we met, that he had had a very problematic sexual past, and that he had been cheating on me for most of our marriage. For those of you who followed me for a long time, you know that part of the reason I'm called Life Take Two is I had an ovarian tumor at age 36 and then acquired a hospital superbacteria infection during the surgery. And I spent 3 years fighting for my life, sometimes unsuccessfully. I literally passed away briefly and had a near-death experience. So when I say I'm Life Take Two, that's not a joke. That's not rhetorical. I have been at what doctors assumed was the end of my life on more than one occasion. I'm a little bit medically fragile, and I've just happened to have some things happen in my life that were unfortunate and that I'm lucky to have survived. So I had had this ovarian tumor. I had spent 3 years up to this point fighting for my life. We'd raised 5 children together. All of our kids were like 11 years old and under when I became sick. And I had this whole house full of kids as I was mostly in bed, mostly in the hospital for most of 3 years. And it was as I was just starting to get back on my feet and starting to recover, and for really the first time in several years, feeling like maybe I'm going to survive. Like maybe this isn't the end of my life. It was right in that little period of time that I would find out about my husband's double life and the dozens and dozens of affairs that he had had. My husband, by the way, hadn't just had like an affair with like a nice friend or somebody from work. As far as I know from all of the evidence that I discovered and everything that he would then confess to when confronted with the evidence, all of his affairs were with streetwalkers, girls who got paid, mostly young runaway foster girls that he was literally circling the streets of Salt Lake City, hunting, finding, and then having relationships with. And by his accounts, there were as many as maybe 100 affairs over the course of our marriage. So the day that I found out that he had been cheating on me, the first question that I had was, please tell me that you've used protection. Of course not that protection is foolproof when you're engaging in dangerous, intimate relationships with people. Things can get spread despite protection, but they definitely do help according to the data. And my husband of 22 years, with whom I had raised 5 kids, I don't know if I can actually tell this story without just bawling my eyes out. My husband turned to me and he said, no, I've never used protection. Why would I pay for it if I'm going to have to wear something that, keeps me from feeling the full pleasure? And, and I asked him, how could you do that to me? You know that for the past 3 years, I have been fighting for my life so that I can be here with the kid. How could you do that? How could you expose me to people? And here is what my husband of 22 years said to me. He said, Jenny, you were dying anyway. And I always just had the feeling that if I exposed you to something that hurried that along, that I'd be doing you and our family a favor. Here's the bit of this that is so important, that if you are a woman anywhere out there, if you have young women in your life, daughters, nieces, if you're a teacher and you teach young women, this is the bit that everyone needs to pay attention to. After my husband said that to me, I still stayed with him. I had to. I was a stay-at-home mom. I hadn't graduated from college. I just had my associate's degree. I didn't have anything that could make any money. I didn't have an education. I didn't have trade school. I had never had any work experience other than for our family business, which was very limited. I did not make a penny of my own. I wasn't on a bank account. I had zero credit. My credit was absolutely, I didn't even exist. I didn't exist in the credit bureau until 6 years ago when I divorced. I didn't own our vehicles. I didn't own a home. I had absolutely nothing. I had no way to even pay for an attorney to file for divorce. I needed my health insurance. I needed my home. I had nowhere to go because I had financially entangled myself. Financial dependency on an intimate partnership is the number one risk factor for domestic violence. And my Mormon church and community and all of the social pressure that I was under from the doctrine and the people had forced me to be a stay-at-home mom because that's what Heavenly Father wanted me to be. During this time, I had a little teeny multi-level marketing business that was just getting off the ground. And I remember thinking, if I can just get up to $1,500 a month, then I can leave this man. And by the time I got up to that dollar amount, he started to pay attention to my business and he joined it himself and started exploiting all of my hard work and taking all of the money for himself. So in my entire adult life, I never, ever had the opportunity to become financially dependent so that I could leave. There is one reason and one reason only why the next night after my husband told me that he had had unprotected intimate relationships with girls that he was just picking up off of the street, and that he thought that he was doing me a favor because it would just end my life a little bit more abruptly. The night after he said that, I was in bed with him. I was cooking his dinner. I was doing his laundry because I had nowhere to go. I'm going to link in the description a Substack article that I wrote about the very day that I found out about his adultery and that choice that I had to make, that if I was going to protect my children and continue to provide for them, that I then was just going to be the next in a string of his sex workers is essentially what I became for the next 3.5 years. A couple of little details. First of all, I did have 5 different STDs. My doctor immediately got to work giving me all kinds of prescriptions and antibiotic shots. I was at risk because he had had totally unprotected relationships with a girl that told me she was HIV positive and a girl who had Hep C. So my doctors did test me for those for several years. I thankfully have never tested positive for those, but he did put me at risk for Hep C and HIV. Another detail, I did stay with him for the next 3.5 years because I had to. Our marriage ended actually 6 years ago in October, when for the very last time, after he said that he was never going to do it again and everything was like totally fine and we were just going to stay married, I caught him one night picking up the very last 19-year-old escort. That was the search that he had put into Google. 19-year-old escort, Phoenix. And he had arranged in a chat room to pick this girl up. I put a tracker in his phone, followed him up there the next night, videotaped the whole thing. And that was the night that our marriage ended. I told him that it was over. I could never, ever live with a man who would continue to do that with me. And within 3 days, the bank account was cleared out. He would evict me from my home. He would repossess my vehicle. I fled domestic violence after 24 years of marriage with absolutely nothing. I had to choose my own safety and the safety of my children and my health and wellness and sanity over little things like being able to buy groceries, having a mattress to sleep on. I would not have a mattress to sleep on until 2.5 years ago when one of my TikTok followers actually purchased a mattress for me. I lost everything to get away from my husband. So there's a reason why a man is not a plan. I'm not the only woman in the world who's ever had her life financially destroyed by an ex-husband. I'm not the only woman in the world by any means who has had her health destroyed by a spouse. That was one of the most shocking things to me because I had never suspected adultery. And after like spending 2.5 decades together, I never once suspected that my husband was bringing home diseases to me and exposing me to STDs that, like, I would have never been exposed to if it hadn't been for him. It's also one of the reasons why I have a rule that I always disclose adultery if I know about it. I had a friend who I found out was cheating on her husband. She was actually a really close friend of mine. She was having multiple affairs, and I told her I'm going to let Phil know what's going on. And I did within about 5 minutes. Um, it's a rule of thumb that my therapist has said that I should always embrace because intimate relationships do come at great risk, and partners need to have informed consent and full disclosure. That's one of the most dangerous things about adultery. There's always one partner who's just left in the dark that doesn't know that she's being exposed to things. Where in an open marriage, swinging, at least you know what's going on and you're able to monitor your health and get the appropriate testing and treatment if necessary and use the protection. I did not use protection with my husband ever. I didn't think that I had to. And once I found out, I was stuck for another 3.5 years. To answer that question, having a partner that was cheating on me was a great risk to my health and almost ended my life. And despite his cruelty, I spent another 3 years as almost 3.5 years as his wife. Um, my favorite part of doing what I do is hearing from you. I would love to hear from you. If you had a cheating partner, how did you find out? And what are you doing to safeguard yourself from that happening to you in the future? Do you have more open conversations with your partner? Do you have those annual STD tests when you go to the doctors? What are you doing to try to protect yourself in your next relationship? I'd also love to hear any questions that you may have. It gives me talking points for my next videos. I want people to know the details of what happened in my life because I know that there are so many women right now who are going through it, who don't have the voice, who don't have a microphone, who don't have an audience. And it's important for all of our collective stories to be shared. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.